Hey, listen, some of us are just not unburdened by what has been, okay? We're all working on it. Still trying to find the joy.
In the case of Democrats, what has been is their testicles.
That's like my universal sign.
Welcome to the I'm Telling God About This podcast. Today, there is a lot of stuff happening in Chicago. You got the DNC, and there's an abortion bus, or the Planned Parenthood kind of mobile bus that is just parked outside. They're pretty correlated. It's really crazy. In fact, there's some really interesting, I got some images found online of the actual station there. So let me know what you guys think. I don't know if this is appropriate or not. Oh, wait, sorry. Right picture. Let me try a different one.
Mobile ritual sacrifice station.
There we go.
That
yes,
tracks.
mobile ritual sacrifice station. Here we go. So in here you have in Chicago, Planned Parenthood offered free vasectomies and medical abortions to an in an oversized van outside the Democratic National Convention on Monday, giving men the chance to get snipped in as little as 20 minutes. Hey, do this weird trick to not have kids again. And grab a taco on your way out. The van, which will also operate on Tuesday, has 2 separate rooms with patients. 2 rooms. It can fill capacity. Patients who filled out the registration form could get the procedure done. The organization sent out registration. So for all 40 spots that they have are full. I read somewhere else that if there is any dropouts of that, they'll re-register it and everything. So yeah, it's pretty insane.
Winner.
Come on, man.
Oh
yeah,
my
and
gosh.
it's not only vasectomies; it's giving out medical abortion pills, and
Right.
so the vasectomies we can sit that aside. Like if you don't want to procreate, I am happy you don't put your genes into our future.
However, I disagree with you about everything? We've been at this
Disgusting.
for 2 minutes.
There is a theological debate. We're not going to gloss over that. I
understand. Tim, lay it on me,
don't
bro.
have
We
to
don't
get into it right now, but I can't let the viewers think
We're not
that's
derailing.
the
We'll
actual position
circle
here.
back. We'll circle back to why we shouldn't do that or should do that.
However, the discussion about murdering babies at the DNC
yes, primary
is more of that which is breaking my heart right now. We can discuss men snipping themselves.
Yeah. Us
and what
4
that
white
means
dudes are going to talk
theologically
about
in the future.
women's bodies as the primary focus of our channel, and we're not going to
This is
touch
why
on the
you
thing
tune
that has to
in.
do. We're just being honest, all right? Like, you know what you're here for. If you don't, well, welcome to the channel.
Anyway.
Listen, what I think is hilarious about this, and we hear this all the time, and we're not I don't want to say we're not a political channel, right? This is a channel about Christian perspective and how we as 4 Christian dads, going through life. Some of us work in ministry. We've all come up in ministry.
We
in some
had
form.
children, which was a good thing.
We did
right, Nick?
procreate
That was
and did not kill our children, which qualifies us to talk on this subject. We married sane women who, didn't do that. But yeah, it's like
That's getting edited out.
all right. Leave that. Anyway, so my point being, but we always talk about this though. But politics is downstream of our value systems and our morals and so when we talk about things that are happening in our society, and as it relates to our faith and how we're living our lives, we can't help but get involved in this to some capacity. And I think what we were just talking as we started the show, what's really telling here, and I'm curious to hear what you guys think, and especially if you're listening to this in the comments section, it's like there's this idea of the iceberg principle. Why is it that elections and stuff seem to sometimes coalesce around single issues, and in Christianity, or it's like, why is it that only some sins seem to take the forefront in, Christian dialogue and Christian communities, whether or not it's LGBTQ trans stuff or abortion or divorce, or maybe not so much, like to say those things like LGBTQ or abortion seem to disproportionately get covered as opposed to things like obesity and divorce, right? All the same in God's eyes, all evil, right? All wrong. But we talk about one more than the other. And a lot of times we give Christians end up like, oh, well, this is a problem or something. But there's something more to this, and I think this is what I'm curious to hear, is like, what we see with this iceberg idea is that when we see certain sins, historically, biblically, even anecdotally in our own lives, you are almost certainly seeing a plethora of other very serious sins and very serious problems below the surface.
It happens, and it's not just with sins, too. I mean, we encounter these things in life. You know, if you go and you have a conversation on a video conference and you see that somebody's name is followed by he, him, or on Twitter, you know, that they have their pronouns, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're an ally or pro-LGBTQ.
Oh,
but
really?
I mean, likely it does, right?
Oh, okay.
I mean, let's be honest, right?
The amount of
you could
benefit
try to
of
make
the doubt
that
that you guys carry around.
Hey, listen, some of us are just not unburdened by what has been, okay? We're all working on it. Still
Am I
trying
allowed
to find
say
the
this
joy.
on the podcast?
In the case of
That's
Democrats,
like,
what has been is their testicles.
that's like my
they're doing it in
universal
the
sign
bus.
for not hiring somebody. It's like if you fly that flag, thank you for letting me know you're not a good fit for this culture.
Oh,
That's
my
fair.
goodness.
So, like, and that's like, and I don't want to go so far as to say that because, you know, I understand we're all in different phases of understanding how different things connect. And more often than not, when I have conversations with Christians and people in general, you know, we kind of ascribe to things on their faces, you know, kind of like with The Acolyte. You know, I like Star Wars. I'm probably going to like this show. And then I turn it on, and then I realize that this is not consistent with my worldview or canon Star Wars. And so what happens? We got to get rid of
Or
it,
good
right? We got to get rid of it. We got to cancel
writing,
it, right?
acting,
And so that's when like we see things work. And so that's what
visual
we're going for
effects.
here. We're looking for that kind of energy.
That's a great analogy. That's a great analogy for people that are looking at us like, oh, you're just, you know, 4 Christian guys trying to force a religion on us. Okay, what about your favorite show that you've literally like grown up with that has a particular canon, and then somebody goes against that canon? It is infuriating. It changes it. It usurps it. It takes the rug right out from underneath you. It's the same thing.
It's wrong.
We have a little bit more grounding in reality, but in Christianity. But what I'm saying is, it's like, don't get angry, don't get mad at us because
Right.
we're holding to a standard of something that we believe and we love, just like you with anything else, you know,
Right.
anything else that people are into. It's warranted.
But call it what it is. You know, like this is my thing. Is like this is the issue. Is that we see this all the time within Christianity. Is that people haven't done the work of understanding how some of these beliefs that they hold are not congruent. They're just not. You know, like even this idea of like libertarian. You know, I'm a fairly libertarian person, and sometimes I feel convicted about this. But like liberty, individual liberty is not really like a core value of Scripture, right? Like the whole idea of being subject to a greater and higher purpose and calling than your own individual needs or wants. That's kind of antithetical to the American dream in a broader space. It's much more akin, you know, to
with libertarians. You've seen them go that direction, kind of jumping the shark. Where, and this happens with many things, like we talked in a previous episode, how if you simply invert the 2 greatest commandments, that's all the amount of error that's needed to end up in grossly, you know, unbiblical places. But the same is true of most things. If you take one value like personal freedom and you elevate it to the maximal extent, to the point where you bend everything else around it, you are going to end up in weird places like legalizing crack at the abortion
really familiar.
store.
Like if you elevate like church authority, like to the level of like Scripture, right? And then you end up with like weird things like, you know, guys in strange hats,
white hats,
and like some other weird theology. No, you're absolutely right. You know, you get those fundamentals backwards, and you can get all kinds of weird stuff happening.
Yeah,
that was a Catholic
I think that's
joke.
a good point that
nobody got that.
I think that's a good point that Tim made. And for those of you who are following along without your understanding of the Bible, the 2 greatest commandments: love God with all your heart, all your mind, and your strength, and the second is like it: love your neighbor as yourself. If you invert those 2, right, you love your neighbor as yourself as the primary epitome of what it is to be loyal to God, and then you love God with everything after that, then yeah, that's an avenue for some heresy there, right?
And that's kind of what we're getting at, is that, like, I'm saying this not just a hedge in the sense that, like, the challenge here is what I want people to think about here is, are my values in the proper alignment? Like, it is good to love God and it is good to love our neighbor, but we can't love our neighbor if the actions that we take in loving our neighbor dishonor God. God does not call us to sin to be obedient. So you can have values, but those values have to be, you can have right values, right? These individual things that you think are good. Social justice is good. True religion is this, take care of orphans and widows, right? So we can have that. But then also there's this whole, call to do things God's way. And so we can't get those things out of alignment. And I think that's what happens with a lot of people, is that they think, like, oh, individual autonomy over my body, or, it's not fair to these children that are going to be born, that they'll be born into impoverished neighborhoods. And then that will create further problems, or what about that young girl's life will be completely derailed by having to have a baby, and then she'll resent the child, and then it's not good for either of them. And so, like, your love or your empathy for the individual, either the child or the mother, but taken out of the context of the divine order and commandments given by God, now all of a sudden that's sin. And not just sin, but like an abomination, right? So,
well, speaking of abomination, I'm curious about your guys' opinions, because I'm arguably one of the most libertarian here on the podcast, and I have no problem saying libertarianism doesn't go anywhere near this topic. Like, I can lay that down in a heartbeat and be like, you are murdering babies.
Yeah, for sure.
Like,
because you have moral guardrails, and you're not just elevating personal freedom above everything.
Right.
Correct. Right. And I don't know about you guys, but this is this thing that really makes me come out of my shell a whole lot. Because back to this iceberg principle about you see a few signs, and it makes you think there might be a whole lot more there under the surface. When I see this kind of sign, when I see the flagrant, makes me want to literally vomit on the podcast, killing of babies in the back of a truck in front of the DNC as this ugly political statement, like, I literally see Satan worship, and it makes me want to push back against that kind of darkness. Like, that's...
We're not talking about scared, vulnerable, uncertain young women who are making a decision out of panic or whatever. Like, we're talking about the knowing facilitators of this kind of thing. They know exactly what they're doing. They're doing it on purpose, and they're not unaware, and they've gotten to the point where it's not difficult to find clips of them openly acknowledging that, yeah, hey, maybe it's a baby, I don't care. Like, that's where we're at, just morally. They're like, there's no longer the facade of saying, oh, well, it's just a clump of cells. That's not even an argument that they really make anymore.
Correct. They're okay with the killing of the baby, and they're just like, whatever. And if that's not pure hedonism, pure satanic evil, I don't know what else in our culture is more than that.
Yeah, did you see that tweet by, I think it was Riley Gaines, where she talked about like satanic worship? Hold on, let me share my screen real quick.
Yeah, no, that was really good.
Sorry, right photo again. My gosh, guys, hold on. Let me do this. Let me do the right one.
Hold on.
Here.
It's not that sacrifice babies.
Well, we're gonna get there. Don't worry.
Yeah. Which pagan god was that?
Molech.
I know.
Molech.
But seriously though, if Space Hernan Cortez showed up and was like, I'm here because you have committed great sins, you'd have to be like...
So Riley Gaines, which if you're not familiar, Riley Gaines, I think she was a she was a swimmer.
Yeah,
that essentially dropped out because she was competing against men. She didn't.
She had to swim against a dude pretending to be a girl.
Yeah. So She says 10 child sacrifices on day one of DNC. Satan is pleased. It was Lila Rose's Planned Parenthood staffing says that the first day of the DNC there did 10 free abortions. So they're bragging about it. They're bragging. Yes,
you know what,
we
Josh,
murdered three lives today.
This is what annoys me about this. This is what kills me, is that this is being promoted like when we do an event and we're like, we got food trucks. It's like, this is my point. It's like, who are you catering to? Like, so here's what I'm getting at. Like, and again, not to make this a political statement, but like, look at who you align yourself with. You know, like, here's the thing. People like to do all this false equivalency or all these equivalencies between like, oh, well, you know, Donald Trump is a misogynist and he's a predator. Like, okay, look, that's sick individual sin that exists in all different ways. But there is a difference, okay, between an individual man's sin that I can call out and that every pastor, reputable pastor that I know, even the ones that would openly say they're voting for Donald Trump, will call a spade a spade. They're saying, look, this behavior is wrong. And those pastors would do the same thing to a top donor in their church or to anyone else, right? Like, hey, look,
nobody changed their stance on adultery or divorce.
Changing that. Yeah, that hasn't changed
because
of
who a candidate was, right?
What is not happening within one party versus the other is a fundamental, like, wholesale, like, who is promoting what here, and what group of people are they catering to, and what are they pulling for? And this is the thing, again, we keep saying this, but like, we judge a tree by its fruit. And if you want to read, you can go back through history, and we talked about this again with worldview. Why worldview matter? In this country, we have freedom of religion. We do not have freedom of outcome. Okay? What that means is, like, you can choose to believe whatever you want, but not all beliefs result in the same outcomes. They just don't. Like, I loved this meme I saw. I wish I had. It's like, you know, if you had to choose to be, you know, colonized by the Aztecs or Christians, which one are you going with? Like, I saw Apocalypto. I'm on Team Jesus. Like, that's what we're looking at.
There's a point there to be made, though, because the reason that a lot of even hyper compassionate Christians will sit there and kind of excuse certain degrees or framings of abortion is out of this, oh, well, they don't know, they're scared, but and that's obviously true. For like, I don't think even though there are wingnuts who absolutely do this and brag about it, I agree that that's true. But here's the thing: the Aztecs believed that they had to stave off the defeat of the sun god to make sure the sun continued rising each new day by sacrificing humans.
Yeah.
Even they, if you had shown up and said, wow, like, because obviously their culture had some kind of taboo against murder. They did.
Sure.
At some level, there were certain people that you weren't allowed to kill, and if you did, there was lawful punishment. We don't know a lot about them because their culture was absolutely and intentionally expunged because the Spanish were like, we're going to erase this from history completely.
This cannot be allowed to happen anywhere.
Hey, what do we do with this giant gold calendar? Melt it down and stamp a Spanish flag. Stamp the Queen's face on it. There is nothing of value here.
Nothing to see here.
Even they would have given you an argument like, oh, no, it's not murder. No, we have to feed the sun god so the new day will keep coming. Like, in that sense, you could say, well, these were ignorant, stupid, panicked people. You know, and I'm pretty sure you can make a bunch of anthropological arguments
you
about
made the
social
point,
control,
though.
but you can do that for abortion, too.
It's the fundamental belief that it springs out of, and this is the point, right? That, like, okay, so if it's the Aztecs or if it's any of these other cultures that engaged in this behavior, it's because they had a fundamental belief in the universe, their core value. They had an existential dread. They believed that the world would end if they didn't do these types of things. In other words, what drives people to extreme behavior is extreme belief, right? So they have this extreme belief that the world is going to end, so it drives them to be able to do extreme things for that. Well, here's my question. What extreme belief do you think is at the root of this extreme behavior? And it's very clear. It's hedonism, right? It's me above everything. It's idolatry. It's the elevating of my own, not just my own comfort and beliefs, but that elevating the individual emotional experience of a single being to the level of truth. Do you hear how fundamentally warped that is? To be able to look at objective reality and elevate.
I think that's a plausible. I think it's plausible, but let me throw a wrench in there, right? Because I feel like I see the same underlying flaw at work in Canada with their medical assistance in dying, as I see in the celebration of abortion. And I don't know if I can draw the euthanasia to a hedonistic
for sure.
route.
It's dignity in death. It's I don't want to suffer and ask. Listen, I've watched multiple interviews with these people, multiples. Okay. And especially the more famous ones now in Europe, these like 14-year-olds that want to die because they're having a hard time in high school, like literally, okay? It comes down to a very simple thing. If you have elevated your emotional experience to the level of objective reality, okay? Then what is above feeling, like what can be worse than feeling bad? What can be worth enduring any kind of hardship? This is why we have record suicides. This is why we have, like, I deal with this every single day. These kids people come into my office and they're dealing with something that, like, they are going through. Like, if you just muted the audio and looked at what was happening in this person's face, you would think that their whole family had been wiped out, that they had just lost a major family member or something like that. And then, like, you'd turn the audio on and it would be like, and then I had to, like, go to work again.
I guess it's another one of those things, you know, you've said this before, Hughes, where you were like, you know, you look at people who are bereft of any, like, moral authority and you're like, you're a marvel to me. How do you not, you know, all the things. And I can't help but have that same thought about, like, the otherwise capable, normal people who inexplicably decide, oh, I want to die. It's like, if I had no moral boundaries and someone said, you have 24 hours to live,
buckle up, Buttercup. This is going to be a fun day.
I'm not even going to need the medical assistance in dying by the time we get to the end of that.
I'm going to go so hard. It's going to be a struggle to hang on. Like, that's what it's going to go that. But,
it would be Crank. That's what that movie. That's what that would be.
Yeah. Wow, that's one we all wish we could forget. Anyway, but I would say that to say, like, I don't want to sound like I'm dogging it. Like, I really am saying this with a sense of tremendous empathy, because here's the reality: is like that is the narrative, because this touches everything. We've done episodes on school. We've done episodes on all these different things, and it's all connected. And this is kind of what I'm getting at: is it's this idea of integrity, the right stacking of things. If you don't have the foundation correct, the whole shebang, the whole thing just it creates problem after problem. These young people and these generations, especially the younger generations, they just don't know any better. Their worst day, like, it literally could be the worst thing ever that they got yelled at 3 days in a row. Like, that literally could be the worst experience of their life. That's mind-blowing to me. But
well, if you have children, you've seen people have the worst experience of their life on several successive occasions. It's like,
having kids is sanctifying. That's another episode.
I used to mock my children with, like, you know, this sarcastic, oh, this is the worst thing that has ever happened. But then I thought, it's like, well, actually, maybe for them.
Yeah,
like,
it is. It really is, right? It truly is the worst day of their life.
The ability for this generation to make mountains out of molehills is absolutely astonishing, and I think it does root in the reality that they are the most important thing, or the elevation of self. And I wonder if a good amount of hardship really would help that and help shape them. However, here we are in a bad economy. Nobody can afford rent. Nobody can even begin to start thinking about buying a house in that generation, or even hope to in the future. But So there is a sense of hardship that everybody is kind of going through it. Yet we are still seeing,
are we though,
this brokenness of, like, oh, it's the worst thing and I can't do anything, right? Now, granted, it's just maybe it's like the shift is not as critical, where it's like, oh, I can't afford groceries, or, you know, or say it's not as critical as, like, oh, well, didn't get any likes on my TikTok or something. and it's more something like, oh, I can't afford groceries, that may be more critical. But I don't think that that's like, honestly, like welcome to the first step of being out of your parents' house. You know, it's like you haven't realized that, oh, I'm on my own, till you sat on the pooper and realized you didn't buy toilet paper because you're on your own. You're like, oh, I have to buy it myself. What do I have to do? And you're walking awkwardly, and that didn't happen to me. It's not a personal story. I heard it from somebody. But like,
we'll get Trevor on the podcast eventually.
That'd be great.
Nick,
sorry, Trevor.
But
anyway, Nick, you had something. What's up?
Yeah, no, I'm curious. So, back to this like insanity. I think this topic so beautifully intersects so many other topics that we've discussed, which you mentioned, Hughes, because. Do you know one of the things that grinds my gears more than anything else is when a Christian tells me they didn't vote? And specifically because of this issue, because, we don't have to discuss the single issue voting concept, but statistically, factually, Planned Parenthood gets $500 million a year from the government.
Yeah.
That matters, and you voting connects that. There's a correlation there that you cannot divorce yourself from. So if you are a Christian, you are listening, and you didn't vote, I'm talking to you. And I think there is fault that, again, it's like you're killing these babies. However,
I don't think you're morally culpable when your tax dollars are used in that way, but you are morally culpable if you don't use the influence you have, e.g. your vote.
Yeah. That's
correct.
And
that's why when you put your head in the sand as a Christian, it's not okay. It is inappropriate. It is arguably immoral. It is immoral.
It's literally the parable of talents. You choosing to say, I want to do the safe thing, which is not pick a side, right?
Yeah.
I just want to abstain. I want to abstain from that. Like, read the parable of the talents. Like, not investing is not an option. God gave you a horse and a message, and you gotta use them both, right? Like, you kill the horse, you can't deliver the message. And the horse is everything. That's your body. That's the country you were born into. That's everything that he's given you to accomplish the Great Commission. You will be accountable for how you did and what you did with it.
Yeah, and I think what you said about, these things being hallmarks of the whole, right, particularly with abortion. And I think you can make that point pretty easily, because you can tell what a group, movement, whatever, really is by the things that you're not allowed to do if you're in it. Yeah. And there is no such thing as a pro-life Democrat.
It's true.
It's not a thing. If a Democrat came up and said, well, I'm actually pro-life, they would essentially be ostracized, even if they tried to continue to say, well, I'm just a moderate Democrat. They would be effectively removed as a recognized member of the group. And so that means that that's what the thing actually is. The same is true of the notion that men can become women and there's no difference between the sexes. That's not a position you can be against. You could cite J.K. Rowling as probably the example. She's a feminist. Like, she's not right wing. I disagree with her on all those views. And she says, well, men can't become women. And they're like, yeah.
Crucify
and so that's how you know
her.
that's what the thing actually is, because those are the views you must hold in order to be in fellowship with that group.
It's the sum of its parts, and that's the point, right? Like, and again, like I remember my dad. I'll never forget. This is like one of the first things I remember my dad talking about with like homosexuality. Is like, it's not just the sin, right? It's that when we see that sin, we always see these other sins with it, and that's the point with what you're making, even with the Democrat thing. It's like, if you hold these values, and this kind of shows how you get there. It's integrity. Like, it's the inverse of what's actually true, right? It's you reap what you sow. If you sow a being subject to a moral authority, right? And you constrain your liberty to that moral authority, then what you will reap, what grows from that thing, will be in line with those values. And what we're seeing here is this: if you sow postmodernism and moral relativism, if you sow the elevation of the individual above everything else, if you sow moral, like elevating the individual's feelings to the level of objective truth, if you sow this, idea of hedonism, then what you reap, the fruit of that, and I don't mean this anecdotally, in our Western culture, the fruit through the Bible, which even if you take it out of the equation as a biblical, as a spiritual text, just as a historical document, the fruit is always perversion, the destruction of, flesh and
that's the end point. For the same reason, because once you abandon the standard, that's where you end up, and it doesn't really matter which standard you choose to adopt. That's why when you see the sort of superficial accusations of like hypocrisy among, like, towards American Christians, like, oh well, you believe in personal liberty but not blah blah blah. It's like, well, that's because the notions of how the government should be run and what liberties I should have exist inside of a framework of other things. It's not the end all be all.
One nation under God.
Right.
Yeah.
And once you break out of that moral framework, once you say, oh, well, I can love my neighbor without, giving God everything I am, you will always end up in those places. Always.
Who's my neighbor? Who's my neighbor? Is it the baby? The baby in the womb? The hard life as a byproduct of poor judgment? Or even bad fortune? Like, that's another hard one. This is another one. This drives me nuts, but I'm going to say it anyway. Like, we live in a broken world, people. Like, we live in a broken world, right? If you find yourself in a ship, all right? You're in a ship. The ship works, okay? And you're in a storm, okay? Do you abandon the ship? No! You stay in the freaking boat, man, and you sail through the storm.
And per your analogy, if you find somebody blowing holes in your ship during the storm,
you shoot them and you throw them off of the boat. Promote good, punish evil.
Not literally.
No,
we're not calling for violence.
No, not
maybe,
the government has
literally.
a monopoly on violence. Okay, that's the whole point. Like,
right.
I took my kids. My kids were at work with me today, and we were walking around the battalion, and I took them to see some of the soldiers in the armory where all the weapons and stuff were, right? And my son is like, yes, violence, and Lillian, my middle child, is like, Henry, you've never experienced violence. Violence is scary. And Avery's like, I can't handle this. Like, I don't know how these are legal. And my buddy looks at my daughter and goes, well, technically they are illegal for, normal people. And I was like, that's right. But the government, they are legal. And why is that? And Avery's like, because the government has a monopoly on violence. My 9-year-old daughter.
Which is why voting matters.
And why teaching your children the philosophy of governance matters. Like, folks, this is what I'm getting at. Like, this isn't just something that's happening in the background on CNN that's called political entertainment. Yes, look, politics are my sports. I don't care about sports ball. And it kills me because I can't talk about, and I choose not to talk about it on here because we want to keep it focused. But this is the reality, is that, like, it's not something that's happening around you. It is the fruit. Hear me. When we say that people get the governments they deserve, that is another way of saying you reap what you sow. Do you understand that?
Right.
So what are you sowing? If, to Nick's point, if you're not sowing anything, then you're reaping what other people are planting.
Well, if euthanasia or abortion or transgenderism, or all these things are downstream from postmodernism. Like, we could talk about the effects, right, of what ultimately come, but really addressing the root of the issue really also affects the things that are downstream. And I think there's been so much of a narrative in the past on the results of the wrong thinking, as opposed to addressing the wrong thinking.
Yeah.
And so I think that the important thing about getting into the space of a good theology, a good worldview, is to address the thinking.
I don't entirely agree with you, because I think that, and I know where you're coming from, but I think a lot of Christians use that exact line of reasoning to absolve themselves of the responsibility to address the results. And they say, oh, well, I can't change the thinking of all these individual people en masse, so what's the point of constraining their sinful behavior when their hearts are just as evil as they were before? I know that's not what you're saying, but
that's a good point.
Obedience versus letting Jesus. We deal with this all the time, Nick. I mean, I'm sure you could talk about this in depth, like how this is like so tied into the whole like porn addiction thing. It's like, oh man, I hate this thing, and I don't know how many times it's like, well, God's got to change your heart, and then you'll be able to do it. You need to just pray for the power and the strength to overcome it. I'm like, or hear me on this, you lack discipline. All right, like you have to.
You need a little bit of major pain in your life.
Discipline. No, that's South Park. You lack discipline.
I would just
you gotta cut that in. I won't get copyright struck.
That's when I bring out the passage about cutting your hand off, and it's like, here we go.
Yeah, we gotta do both.
Really, though, there are practical things you do to constrain yourself. That's why, and that's another thing that the left mocked with. Or I should say that the left media mocked when it was like, oh, well, Mike Pence won't have dinner with like a woman alone who's not his wife. It's like, well, these are guardrails that one sets up for themselves to promote good actions.
Yeah.
Like,
oh, sweetheart, it's called respect. it's help me, help you. All right, help us. Right? Don't procreate. All right? Don't. Yeah. It's okay.
But it is hedonism, because the idea that you would deny yourself anything is something that you ridicule.
How dare you?
It's the same reason. That's how you resolve the paradox. The idea that like the political left is obviously hugely in support of any of the sexual deviancies. All of them.
Yeah,
pick
all
one,
of them.
add one, make one up. Support.
Sure.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But they will at the same time turn around and ridicule their opponents on the right. It's like, oh, secretly gay, this, whatever. It's like, wait a second. So is it, which is it? But there's not actually a contradiction there. What they're actually ridiculing is not the notion of sexual degeneracy. It's, oh, you would actually try to deny your natural urges.
That's it. It's the base principle.
I'm coming around on your hedonism thing. I'm thinking
about it. To thy own
it.
self be true.
Yeah.
Do what thou wilt. That is the whole of the law.
Right.
That's it.
I think it's idolatry. Satanist creed or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I wonder.
Those are both.
I wonder if
Manly Hall, Manly P. Hall, and what's it called?
Aleister Crowley.
Aleister Crowley, and not Manly P. Hall. That's the other guy. Sorry. Yeah.
Aleister Crowley.
Yeah.
That sounds like a demon's name.
Yeah.
Like maybe that's just my Terry Pratchett showing, but
we're gonna do a whole episode on symbols.
Dude, we still haven't touched on the Nephilim, man.
You're not ready.
We
They're
really
not ready.
need to do that.
They're not ready.
We're not ready.
We have to
leave it in the comments.
them.
Make a comment if you want to hear more about the Nephilim.
Here's my question though, for the comments, for real though, on this note. What stop sign, like what warning sign, like do you ever think about this? Like when you watch all these apocalypse movies and you're like, dude, what are you still doing in the house? Like, why haven't you left yet? Right. Do you not see all things like I watched what was it, 2012, which I jokingly call 2012 ways John Cusack almost dies. Like that's literally that whole movie is just me going,
that's great.
No, why? Huh? Like we all do that. So here's my question. Like, what is the thing that you think about like that's the line? Like when I see that, I'm out. And all of you are going to be like 4 white dudes talking on a podcast about Jesus.
I've had actual Christians rationalize this to me. Christians who are pro-life and would agree abortion is wrong and say, well, actually, technically there's more abortions under Republican administrations than there are in Democrats and blah, blah. And it's like, no. I'm not doing an optimization problem to try and, through social engineering, minimize the total number of baby murders. Like, I'm trying to enforce a moral principle. Like, that's the actual goal here. In fact, it was the guy, what's his name? The VeggieTales guy. He's another one of
Phil.
You would know this. This is you trivia,
right?
No,
something.
But he's one of those types that makes those kinds of arguments. Just so you know, I'm not standing up some effigy that doesn't exist. Who makes these very progressive Christian arguments, and it's those kinds of people that I think Hugh's question should be rightly directed towards. Like, oh, okay, well, when would you cross the guardrails?
Right.
Like,
what's the line?
Phil
Where
Vischer.
are we saying? And you know what? This isn't a new problem. And again, I want to keep bringing this back there because for all of you people who are like, oh, we're not doing it. Like, look, let's bring this back to the Bible. Here's my question. Like, this is literally the same thing that happens to Israel like every single time. Like every single time they should have clearly seen that this was a problem, and they still did it. Like, what is the line where you say maybe we don't build the golden calf? Like, Aaron, maybe like everyone's saying like, well, I need a job. I just wanted to contribute. I don't want to make everybody sad. Like, they miss home. They miss their they miss their old way of doing things. They miss their old deities. We used to pray to the cow on Tuesdays. Like, they just miss Tuesday cow praying day. Like,
but this is what Christians do. They believe in the New Testament era because we live in the age of grace.
That's right.
That suddenly there's no hard stops, and it's like, no, the law still exists, and it's there to bring you knowledge, because God doesn't expect you to be able to go from the first and the second greatest commandments and extrapolate down from there all of the little things. So he also articulates a whole bunch of other really specific things. So when you trip over those lines and you're like, oh, the line is behind me, now oh, my logic took me wrong somewhere. And now I should have if there's a flaw that separates my reasoning of what's moral between the actual endpoint that I've been expressly given in Scripture, that's how you know. You don't get to bring in your logic at that point and say, well, I don't know, because technically, and that's what I see, a lot of equivocation along those lines from Christians who want to do exactly that kind of equivocation and avoid simply saying, I don't always know why it's wrong, but it says
it's wrong.
It is.
It's It's obedience. That's it. And that's exactly it. And you know what's crazy? This is why, we talked about marriage, we talk about kids, but these are sanctifying things. These are institutions that God has created to sanctify us. And what do we mean by sanctification? This is the great irony. That the promise of Scripture is this, that if we recognize Jesus as Lord, if we repent of our sin, if we confess him as Lord, and we turn to him and we look at his ways and we follow in obedience to him, empowered by the Holy Spirit inside of us, that
obedience.
Yeah,
yes.
Keyword, that he will do what? That he will change our hearts. These words that we throw around in Christianity, like sanctification, most Christians don't even know what this means. This is literally brainwashing. And I mean this in the purest form of that word. It's literally cleansing your brain of your own neurodegeneracy, right? And having it be how it was intended, to be in line with what God wanted. And here's the ironic thing, that when you follow in obedience, and the 12-step programs, like AA, they get this right. You can't think your way into right action. You have to act your way into right thinking.
Can we do an episode on AA?
We will. Yeah, we will eventually. But you have to act your way into right thinking.
So many axes
love
to
this.
grind.
I do too, but I love this statement because it is so true. But that's the ironic thing, is that our own thoughts, right? Our actual way of thinking, our first impulse, can become what God intended us to have.
And for all of those of you who either are or who are subjected to, progressive, compassionate brands of Christianity who like to downplay the obedience aspect of it, I'm gonna check our Bible verse box because people were ripping us in the comments for not having enough.
We're gonna get one.
Jesus. This isn't some extrapolation of an epistle somewhere else. Jesus said, "Not everyone who cries out to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven. Only those who do my will." We've kind of gotten to this place where we think, oh, say the magic ABC prayer before you die, and you're in. And that's not supported by Scripture. And so don't underemphasize the importance of obedience, and don't flagrantly facilitate the degrading, the desanctifying disobedience of others either. Because what happens when you see abortion, women who had an abortion and later come to, there was one really famous activist who, she had an abortion and now she works to basically, Nick, do you know who I'm talking about?
I don't know who. Well, it's not Layla. No, it wasn't her. She runs anti-abortion org. I don't know who the famous activist was, though.
But the point of that is that once people do commit some of these sins, they become more invested in the worldview that supports it. It becomes a longer walk back because you're now having to deny greater and greater portions of yourself and repudiate your own actions. And there's few things that humans hate doing more than saying that they were wrong. And that's something that those of us who were saved at a young age experience, where it's like I didn't have as much to deny, as much self to deny, right? And then later on in life it's like, well, they're like, not to say like, oh, and I never sinned again, but but you do that thing with the knowledge of what, like, it's not part of your identity. The sin is recognized as being your second nature.
That's it. And that's and this is and this is kind of one of the things I think we should look at too with this, and maybe this is a good tie-in to kind of wrap this up. But it's like on the verses idea and things that Jesus said. This is what's crazy to me. A lot of the justification for abortion is this picture of these women who are in these circumstances that are wholly beyond their control. What does Jesus say? True religion is what? Take care of widows and orphans. Take care of widows and orphans. What's the implication? Widows and orphans are going to happen.
Well, he said, the poor will always be with you. Like, this is not new information.
So that's loving. Like, that's my point, is that our job as Christians... That goes back to
Job. Yeah. One of the oldest books in the Bible. Like, the list of actions that, like, God's perfect man Job did, being a father to the fatherless and having the widow weep for joy. I mean, it's just... And then from there all the way through to the New Testament, with Jesus.
So that's my point. Your job is not to superimpose, like, oh, well, I don't want this woman to be a widow or to be a single mother or for this child to be born an orphan. No, your job is not that. Your job is to take care of them when that happens.
Right.
Right? Like, the orphan's going to happen. The widow's going to happen. The single mother's going to happen. Your job is to support those women through the brokenness of the world, not to heap sin upon sin. And this is like a fundamental issue. And this is, I mean, it's this simple. It really is this simple. God never calls us to sin, to do the right thing. Period. Full stop.
Okay. Hey, listen, some of us are just not unburdened by what it's been. We're all working on it, still trying to find the joy. Okay, so for Democrats, what has been is their testicles. They're doing it in the bus. Yeah, it's their testicles. Snip, snip, the testicles. Yeah, it's their testicles. Snip, snip, the testicles. Yeah, it's the testicles. Snip, snip, the testicles.